We're ready to go.
Good. Let's go. All right, so we'll declare the Chief Executive Employment and Remuneration Committee meeting for the 26th of April, 2023 open. It is 9:31. Welcome, everyone. We'll start with the Karakia. Do you want to
do that? Whakataka taho ki te uru, whakataka taho ki te tonga, kia mā kinikina ki uta, kia mā taratara ki tai, he hiaki ana te ahukura, he teo, he huka, he ho, hu, he hei, mauri ora.
Thank you for that. All right, we've got apologies from Councillor Downard. Everyone else is here. And we've also got Councillor Cookson and Councillor Nickel in attendance as well. Can I get a motion to accept the apologies, Chris, and a second from Warren? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Carried. And confirmation of the agenda. We've got a few items in the open session and then we go into the public excluded. Can I get a motion to I'll move the motion first, which Chris seconds the confirmation of the agenda. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Carried. Disclosures of interest, any additional disclosures or in reference to their agenda items?
No.
Nope. All right, so we'll move on to item number 5. This is on page 5 of your agenda. This is the key rule continuity planning. Chief Executive, did you want to start this?
Yeah, thanks. And I thought this would be useful for the committee, these two papers. It's on the schedule of things we should report on a regular basis, just to give some information to the committee that given that people are our most important asset in council in terms of being able to achieve things, what we're doing in terms of trying to future-proof ourselves for key roles, identifying key roles and how we make sure that should there be a sudden departure, some continuity in the organisation, be it either within or externally. And the second paper, which would be the next one, which is about what our processes and policies we have in place to ensure that we are doing the right thing by our people in terms of expected from a legislation point of view, or in terms of what we're trying to achieve to make it a great place to work. And I think you met Stu at the last committee meeting. Stu's been with us, what, about 6 months, 5 or 6 months?
Over 6 months.
Extensive experience from other sectors, and which he brings to us. And so this will be partly, maybe he can give some thoughts about the things that we have in place. But maybe, some thoughts, Stu, about how we're going against these, and any thoughts you've got about the changes and improvements that you've been having discussions with me about?
Yeah. So I guess we're currently underway with the key role identification across the organisation currently, and that's due to complete soon. So the P&C team are working with the different senior managers across the organisation, and that list will then come back to the executive. You'll see later on when I talk up to the other paper, there will be some overlap in the future with this and another talent management piece. I guess the key role identification is critical in that we obviously want to be able to continue as an organisation. If we lose someone, then we would like to have a depth of talent there. I guess for me, there's often a tendency in business to look at, the CFO as a key role, and that is correct, and we should be looking at that as an example. But there are other roles that are equally important across the organisation at different levels. If you look at what happened, for example, down in Napier with the floods and stuff, things that have gone wrong there, a lot of that has been attributed to the lack of depth and skill that are currently at the kind of mid to senior layer of the business. They've experienced high staff turnover, and with that they've lost a lot of institutional knowledge around those flood systems and stop banks and specific things to those areas. So it's really about identifying, all of the kind of roles that are quite critical across the organisation. You guys, I think you went on a bus tour recently, and you may have come across Kenny over in Para, who's a great guy. He's one of 3 across the country that can respond to some of the critical things that happen there. So his role would be a great example of identifying that. So I guess it's important to think quite broadly about where these roles are across the organisation. I guess in my previous experience, people have tended to focus on, the executive, and that's a fair call, but there are other roles out there that are equally as important. And to be honest, many of the executive roles can be replaced, quite easily out there in the market, whereas some of the things that require 10 years plus experience in that industry can't be replaced so easily. So I'm taking quite a broad look at it. And you'll see when I go on to talk about the paper, The Good Employer Obligations and People Strategy, how this links through to that. So that's really a bit of an update in that space. Any questions?
Oh, sorry, and Stu, we've got a bit of a work program because this has been something at ELT with you leaving and you coming in.
Yeah.
It probably hasn't been the focus just in the last few months, and especially some of the events that have been going on.
That's right. That's right.
But this is something that we're going to roll through ELT.
Yep.
Have another look at where we've identified key roles and make sure it's up to date and what,
Right.
what our succession is.
Right.
Great. I think it's fantastic that you raise our awareness of that. While we highly value our executive team, that particular set of skills that is not necessarily specialist to the work we do, whereas the people that are out there manning the flood pumps and
Depth of knowledge that's
Yeah.
not just pick up in 6 months, it takes years and the local knowledge as well. It's kind of,
Yeah. well, in those relationships.
Yeah.
So much of that, particularly in terms of emergency responses, it comes down to knowing the landowners and having productive relationships with them. So thanks for raising that. Just wanted to get you to comment on the double hatting. I can understand that in terms of a short-term cover, but I just am wanting us to remain quite cognizant of workloads and well-being. And given some of the turnover we've experienced, I wouldn't want us to be heavily reliant on that as a means of cover.
Totally agree. It's an emergency type,
Yeah.
short term. Yeah.
Yeah. So I just wanted to raise that because you do mention it as providing short to medium term cover. I'd like us to trend err on the short
Right.
as much as possible. Any comments from committee members?
First paper.
Yeah, this is on page 5, but you did make the comment, Stu, that there's a few papers that all sort of mesh together. So,
Just going back to while you're pausing, just going back to Kenny. So the comment around the 3 around the country, is that 3 in our organisation spread across? No, that's 3 in total. Yeah. Yeah.
Quite critical.
Yeah. Extremely with a gentleman with that sort of background and experience. Yeah. Yeah. And what sort of programs he's bringing through to bring people in through under him and get that knowledge.
well, and what programs are we incentivizing in terms of working with training providers, tertiary providers, to ensure that we're fostering younger people to come through the system and
right.
choose this as a career? Yeah.
And the critical point, I think, is too, it's not that just the business as usual, but that, that emergency situation type scenario and what, the critical thinking behind that and our responses to those issues when they come up.
I just question where you're going to find anybody with Kenny's knowledge and skills outside to train other people. Like he seems like a resource that we could be using. Train not only the internal people here, but also other catchment areas.
Totally agree.
If there's only 3 of them available in New Zealand, then their skills are pretty hard to replicate.
That's right. That's right. And that's they're kind of meshed together, these two papers, and I'll talk to you a little bit more about my plans for that, I guess, with the next one.
So I'm just going to check with you, Democracy Dave, about, given that these are a bit meshed together and a lot of my comments were across both of them, are we able to combine these two agenda items so as to talk through both of them and then receive both reports?
Resolve them differently.
We can do that. We'll
Can we
just
do that?
merge the two. They're both open. It's no problem. And we'll just do two resolutions when you're finished.
Okay, I think that might better serve the process. I do see your hand up there, Paul.
Thanks, Pamela. Look, two observations. The first is that I think it's really useful that particularly the new members of the committee get taken through the processes that that Chris and Stuart are undertaking here to check our depth, make sure we've got continuity. I just make the point, though, that it might be a little bit premature in the sense that the term of reference is really, 3.5 is really about ensuring that we've got depth for our key senior roles. There's nothing here that says we do or we don't. What it says is that work is going on now and should be completed by the beginning of May. So I suggest what this committee's real interest in is to hear the output of that at some point so that they can hear what the key roles have been divined to be and what level of cover we've got for those key roles. And it may be a timing thing, Chris, in terms of when this was put on the agenda versus when the work was to be done. But I do think that in terms of delivering on the term of reference, we've got to come back to it at some point when this work's been done, and you can share with us whether we are exposed, where we are exposed, and what we're doing about it.
Yes, absolutely agree. I think in terms of the agendas that came out, we thought it was useful, as you said, and as I said at the start, to probably get the committee across this piece of work. CLT is we've got it on our plan at the moment, and with Stu's got some other things under his feet. Stu, would be when we should bring it to this committee.
That's right.
Thanks, Paul. I think in terms of the discussion that's just been had about experience, of course, we get caught with people. We can use Kenny as an example, but I don't want to think he's the only important person in the organisation. Because if you think of finance, you think of IT, there's all sorts of spaces where, you need to some
Specialist knowledge.
These are the people who are in demand for everything, because it's not only they have technical expertise, but be able to smell stuff, they smell if it's right or wrong, and that's kind of one of the reasons that they are so good at what they do. And they often get called upon for multiple things. It's probably not just double hatting, it's probably triple and quadruple and whatever. And they're the people it's hardest to find the time for development and training, and to find the time to put aside to develop the knowledge system so we can capture some of the experience. And I think all organisations have the same thing. It's a reality, but we've just got to be careful that the expectations of these people, getting people alongside them to draw from the experience is the key thing. Whether it's within corporate systems or field, it's a practical knowledge.
So you're going to finish this work in May and bring the results back, or the data back in like August, or what's so we get it on our work program?
I think I don't know if you've got the schedule in front of you, Dave or Paul, but I think that the next 1 or 2 meetings are probably going to be around my performance review and whatever, so it would be later in the year. I'm just wondering, Stu, if it's certainly going to be, I don't know if it's all going to be, the first cut of it might be completed in May, but developing this.
That's right.
Having identified roles and developing systems to manage key roles is probably a bit longer than just the first week in May. And I do know that some of it will be, developing knowledge systems. Some of it will be, we have to look outside, because you can't But just be able to give you some confidence of the identification of the roles and what we're doing about it. We'll come back later in the year.
I think that what Paul's asking for and what I'm asking for though is it's not just a description of the systems you're going to put in place. It's here's the data so that we as a committee can clearly see that when we put a system in place, which we have been doing for a number of years and spending, dosh on, that we can see what we're starting with in the data and what we aim to change, and then can monitor the progress on that. So I think that that's the message we're trying to send. All right, so I'm just noting what we said about we'll combine these two papers. We'll go on to pick up anything in the next one before we do any motions to, if there's anything to note in those motions. So this is item 6, the good employer obligations and people strategy on page 9. Was there anything you want to?
Yeah, if you're happy, I'll talk to this. That would
Yeah,
be
go
great.
ahead.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
So I guess, as you would expect of an organization of this size and complexity, you would like to think that we had good policy systems and processes in place, and we do. And I guess it's one thing to have lots of good policy systems and processes in place, but it's actually another to actually implement them and see what they work like in a practical sense. And as you go through this, you'll see a number of things. I'll take you through. Our staff turnover currently sits around 19%. That's high. We're being told that it's because of people able to get promotion and higher salaries elsewhere. So we're constantly challenged with that. As we go through, this strategy was put in place a few years ago, and we're sort of half to 2/3 of the way through it. It seemed like a reasonable strategy when I picked it up. And it's going to continue on to the end of 2024 kind of thing. So we're about midway through, but there's still quite a lot to do and to achieve from it. I guess when we move through to the health and safety piece, you guys hear at the council meetings what's going on there, but it's a lot of it's about engagement and actually what we do. And the health and safety reps for me are actually a really critical role across the organisation. They're the independent voice, and we should have them more engaged, in my view, and trained up so they can actually sit alongside managers and help support them with investigations and better delivery for us, and actually bring some intel back around areas that they have actually identified themselves that they think could be improved. Well-being, obviously, it's a continued focus for us. It's important that we show that we actually genuinely do care. That's something that's critical, and we've got all of the things through there that we're currently doing, but that's not a stagnant list. We're keen to keep progressing that and looking at what other new and innovative things that we can do to continue with that. The practical application of health and safety has always been really important to me. You can read all the legislation and you can try to apply it, as a text, but when you actually go out there in the field, it's quite different. And we have a great team with Marie and Nawai and Matt. Matt's a highly technical guy, and he will be able to come along with the policy to the letter. But there's a skill in actually being out there in the organisation and working with someone like Kenny. When you're out at the flood pump in Para and you have the policy says, Kenny, that you will do these things, and Kenny says, well, actually, this is a different scenario. Look, it operates a bit differently than what the policy says. So how can we get an outcome that will have a practical application, but that will also meet the needs of the legislation? So that's an ongoing discussion that happens right across the organisation. It's the same if you're out there with the ICM guys checking on all of our 2,000 assets that are out there. Every one that they go to is different, and you may have a policy that's in place, but it's a practical application of that, and it's about how the health and safety team are actually out there partnering with the business to go out and actually physically see, when I park the car at the side of the road, is it safe to park here? Do I need to pull off? I'm about to jump over a fence and go down a steep bank. Before we've even got anywhere near the asset, it's about having that discussion. And when we go back to the well-being piece, there's a significant part around just generally caring for people. You know, hey, you're going to go out in the field today. How are you feeling? Has everything been going okay? Have you had an argument at home at the weekend? Do you feel well? You know, it's actually about genuinely checking in with people and making sure that they're all right to be actually doing the jobs that they're doing, because there is an element of risk to everything that we do. So that's really important to me, and thankfully Marie, as the leader of the health and safety team, has really got that, and we've got some really key people across the organisation that have joined us from organisations like Fonterra, who this is second nature to, and we're keen to harness those people and that kind of thinking and spread that throughout the whole organisation. So there's a consistency of approach. So we try not to forget, you know, hey, ICM might be doing a fantastic job, but if you go over somewhere else, there, you know, it's not consistent, or not doing it as well as we would like. So that practical application is of key importance and will be continued to be a focus for us. As you work your way through, obviously I'll take not all as read. We've got the equal opportunities there that we're continuing on. 34% of our vacancies are being filled internally. That's a really good result, and that shows that we've got depth of talent in the organisation, which is really good. We move further through. I guess one of the biggest learnings for me in joining the organisation in the last 5 months has been my lack of cultural awareness and knowledge. Chris and Neville did a great job through the interview process, talking to me about, you know, coming into the organisation and my previous exposure to all the cultural things of New Zealand. And I have had a reasonable amount, I guess, working for the different businesses that I've been in, but not to the level that WRC has. And I guess for me, it's great. I'm on board with it. I'm supportive and I want to see it advanced. But if I hadn't had that attitude, it would have been a really difficult place for me to be in, because, you know, and the organisation wouldn't have been in a particularly good spot, because my role is quite fundamental in promoting this and ensuring the development and everything else. So I guess some of the things that I've picked up would be really nice to have an external view for people coming into the organisation, so that they've been given a bit more of a heads up, I guess, around, you know, our cultural expectations. And I'm working with the team just to put that into our advertisement, so that it's quite overt out there that, you know, when you come into this organisation, there is an element of culture and expectation that you will be at least supportive of that to some extent.
Stu, just to clarify, you're talking about a Te Ao Māori T50 partnership.
Yeah. And I guess I've been personally quite fortunate now in the health and safety space is a highly skilled lady, and she's been teaching me Karakia and my pepiha and all that. You've been going along to the pofferties, and it's been a great journey. But I think it's important that from an external view, people have a good understanding pre-job. And going through, Mali and her team have done a great job, and Rangi Marie, before she left, on developing a competency framework for that. And basically, we are at the point of we're just about to plug that into our goals. That's a development option for people. And we've also got other language modules that are coming online now. So that's in a good space, but obviously will continue to be an evolving, growing place. We move through and we get to the L&D section, the learning and development, and that's a real strength, I think, of this organisation. We have a great team there. Katie Ann Diamond has done a fantastic job at leading while the previous team leader role has been vacant. She has a real strength in the coaching and development and leadership across the organisation, and we've got quite a wide offering of development. Coming from the private sector, it was pretty refreshing to be able to, you know, offer a significant amount of development across the organisation and not be fighting on a shoestring for 20 grand a year to get some kind of development for 4 people across the business. It's nice that we have this offering that is comprehensive and has actual real value. You know, the Be My Best program and the leadership development program are both fantastic and have got really good feedback. And we've had them audited with the Be My Best has been audited internally and it's come out really well. So that's a real benefit. I guess where I would like to see that take to the next level is really around, I'll talk a little bit later about, you know, our talent identification, but I would like to know who are our top 5% or our top 10% in the organisation, and then try and wrap some of this L&D around them and give them a structured career development pathway that they can be developed and then look for promotional opportunities. I don't know quite how that will look. Obviously, when you go to the appendix of the final page of this, you'll see that all of the offering that we have across L&D. So one or two of these things that are quite generic across the organization may drop off and provide that focus, because the kind of top talent in the organization is of critical importance, and that needs a strong focus going forward. I guess as we progress through, got a pretty good split of male and female across the organization. And recognition of people with disabilities, and we're trying to encourage to employ them where possible. We've got Morris, who works upstairs. He's a fantastic guy. I'm not sure if you guys have come across him yet, but he does a great job for us, and we're constantly looking at how we can improve that offering. We've just improved our fire escape, and people trained up to help Morris evacuate the building in that case.
He's in a wheelchair.
He is, yeah. And again, talking about having great policies and procedures, and then what we do with them is key. We move through, and you'll see there the code of conduct. So we've got a good code of conduct. I guess I think it could be used potentially a little bit better, and that's going to be an area of focus for me, just that we kind of identify issues as they come up and resolve them quickly and move on, and not let things fester. On the whole, it's been fairly good, but it's an area that will be a focus for me. Moving on through, there's a few graphs towards the end, and one of them that's important really when you look at our turnover and trying to bring people into the organization is our speed at which we do that. And when people go out to advertise for a role, they'll put the advert request through to the HR team, and they'll put it up, and then they'll a closure date, and then they'll have some shortlisting. There'll be a bit of time in that, and then there'll be a time to organize interviews, and then there'll be another week in that. And it kind of, we're building a lot of time into the process that I don't think is needed. And we need to be quite short and snappy when we're trying to get people on board, because the unemployment is so low across the organization. Everybody is fighting for talent. And another small business might be able to act and within days have somebody in the door, whereas it can take us weeks and weeks. So I've been working with the team to support the managers across the organization to think about, when you're going to advertise for a role, look at your diary, schedule it right to the very end, schedule your interviews, schedule your shortlisting and your reference checking, and so that we can be quite proactive and actually get on there and do that. So that's going to be a bit of a focus. And then also looking at, are there other avenues that we can use around assessments to ensure that we're getting the right kind of people, test that verbal and numeric reasoning for those kind of critical roles. And I guess the unemployment sits there at 3.3%. There's a bit of a reality to that as well, that most of that will actually be unemployable. I'm not sure if you've seen any of the data that's been coming out from across the country in the previous few years, but there have been a number of people and number of industries that have targeted that 3.3% and put a lot of time and effort into them, got them into their business and paid them and trained them, and by the end of the week, out of the 20 or 30 people, there's maybe one left, if even. So it's a real challenge that exists. While that says there are 3.3%, it's not really a reality. And with the challenges with immigration, it's just been a really, really tough market. Moving on, I guess the cultural perspective, I probably have mentioned to you guys before about values. They're really important to me, and we've got really good values here at WRC, and the directors have all done a fantastic job at recognizing people at their directorate meetings and celebrating success. But for me, I think that we could do more. I think that we could make these more overt and have them celebrated across the whole organization rather than just a directorate meeting. We do have processes around that with NFR and stuff like that, but I think with a bit of a push, that could really improve our culture further. Moving through, we've talked a little bit about care, that manager check-in, actually genuinely caring. And then the change piece, really, the thing that's most interesting for me, and will probably be most disruptive in the next couple of 3 years, is going to be AI. So I'm really keen to get a handle on that and get into some of the organizations that are actually going to be bleeding edge, that are going to really be at the forefront and find out what's going on. I don't think it's a place that we want to be. It's a very expensive and resource heavy place to be bleeding edge, but it would be really nice to be a second adopter kind of thing and find out the learnings from that. So that'll be a focus for me personally to look at that in the coming years. And then I guess from how do we measure this? Neville has done quite a lot of work with the executive before me at getting Tiara Tupu dashboards up and running across the organisation, which he has now done. And a lot of the work that we do will feed into that in the health and safety and HR space. And it's really just about, being across that. We talked earlier about that key role planning. We have 47 roles that have been identified that are key. We've only got 35 of them, for example, that are, someone has a pathway to do that. So we've now got a gap. How do we do that? It's all those kind of things. How do you measure that as you go? So that's a bit of a roundup of that report. I guess I talked about it's all well and good having policy systems and processes in place, but it's what are we physically doing about it to move the organisation forward. And I've got a bit of a plan on a page for the next 8 months for my team of what I'm going to share with them around, hey, this is kind of what we want to be targeting. And I guess in the health and safety space, it's really continuing to focus on those critical risks. Are we ensuring that across the whole organisation, we have consistency of practice around those things that we know have real potential to cause harm. It's upskilling of the reps. Another big piece of work that I have kicked off is really around our communications. So at the minute, we have a lot of people that go out on site, and we have in-reach devices that they all should use to go out on site and that can communicate with us. I guess on looking into it, I was amazed at the breadth of safety communication devices that we have. And the lack of consistency, I guess, that there is across that. And it's not, it's nobody's fault, and it's not really a huge concern because there are lots of safety systems in place, but it would be really nice to have them consistent. So if you go from RUD to ICM, that the same software and hardware is used, so you can quickly transition across the organization. So we've kicked off a piece of work, I guess, with key people across all of the directorates to learn actually what do we have, and then what is the current best practice technology that's out there in the market. Then someone come in and kind of share that with us. I didn't have I kind of thought, we've got our EPIRBs, the maritime guys use those. We've got radios, we've got inReach, we've got cell, we've got GPS. But when I got into the discussion, I actually found out that we've got 7 different kinds of radios, or sorry, 6 different kinds of radios, and none of them talk to each other. So it's fantastic that they, work really well. And it would just be nice to have some consistency across that. So that's going to be a piece of work. I guess the talent identification, we've talked a little bit about that key role and succession planning, and that has a real link for me around our talent identification. Those key roles should be filled by that kind of top talent, and they could be done in the same place. So it's really about, getting a matrix out into the organization to identify all of our talent, not just the top 5% or the bottom 5% or the middle, but looking at all of them and then finding out who the key top talent are and having a process in place to develop them, pay them well, and see them promoted and seconded. And that might mean that in roles, I use Kenny as an example because I knew that you guys would know Kenny and it would mean something to you. But Kenny, for an example, if we identify that as a very important part of the organization, we may not just want to have a senior who will be kind of working their way towards Kenny's. We may want to look at, do we actually have a graduate program? Do we trial something and have somebody at a grad level coming in from a top talent in the university? And then do we have an intermediate, level that they have a pathway to progress into, and then a senior, so there is actually a career pathway for people that they can see and that they want to be part of. And obviously being aware of staff turnover and everything else, that builds in a bit of depth there, that it's not just relying on one other person to do one role. So there'll be a piece of work around that to identify those kind of critical roles. And then there'll be a discussion with the executive around, is that a feasible option? Because obviously there's a cost to all of that.
Stu, just multiple time, and there might be some questions that council ask around it. But that's
it's okay.
No, I was just going to say, just probably want to summarize across the top of what your focus is.
Yeah. So I guess other key areas are really around turnover. So how do we reduce that? Staff engagement, how do we continue to really build on that? And I guess that student and recruitment piece that I talked about earlier are key focuses.
I do wonder if Kenny's ears are burning as his name has been mentioned.
Yeah.
In this meeting. But like you say, we have a number of stars
There are.
amongst our staff. Just to start off, and then I'll come to you, Robbie. So at the start, you were talking about the people or the people strategy that kicked off. When was that? 2018?
Yeah.
Yeah, 2018. And you said that it was a good strategy.
Reasonable. Yeah, it's reasonable. Yeah.
Strategy. I guess I just am wondering if I look at that on page 15, the graph about WRC creates an environment to be my best. It seems fairly static since 2008. Is that 17, 18? I can't read it. I think it says 8. Oh, yeah, it is 18. So if that strategy has worked and served us because we have invested in that, I guess I would expect to see different data coming through. So
So I guess, I mean, it's a wee bit like, it's a bit like policy and procedure, isn't it? You can have the best strategy or you can have the best policy and procedure, but it's what you actually physically do that moves the dial. So I can't talk to, I mean, I believe that Nick did quite a lot of work to get just the basic policies and systems and processes up and running. I don't think, that there were many prior to him. Chris, you may know more than me about that, but I think he did quite a lot of work to get it, up to a reasonable standard. And I guess for me, it's really about, them building on that and taking it forward. So we've got that, good baseline of policy systems practices there. And now it's about physically doing the work to move the dial, I guess.
yeah, I think that 5 years of getting a strategy with policies and procedures in place seems a considerable amount of time and investment to not then see the dial moving. So I think you're picking up what I'm putting down here, which is we want to see the dial move, right? We want to ensure that there's data put in front of this committee that says, here's where we are today, here's where we want to be, this is what we're going to do to get there, and then reporting along the way, because I don't want to, in 5 years from now, either myself or have somebody else looking at the same sort of flatline data. I don't think that's.
If I could just, oh, sorry.
To be fair, we've got staff turnover at 19%. I'd like to know at what levels, like that doesn't mean a lot to me, because some people come and go in jobs. Critical people, you want to hang on to them. And that chart on page 15, I think reflects that, to be honest. You are never going to get 100% satisfaction. You're always going to have a level of dissatisfied staff. That's the nature of people. You can't be perfect. And I don't see that as being an alarming. I think that's what I'd expect when you've got a staff turnover of 19%. What I would be concerned about if the 19% include key staff members and how many are included in that number. Am I allowed to carry on, or do you want to?
Can I just comment on that? Because I think it's really interesting points that you're raising. With the turnover, my experience of it is that we have quite a stable, more senior workforce who've been here for quite some time, and often they retire out the top end. We bring in a lot of young people, and then they become quite skilled quite quickly in our type of organisation, because we've actually got quite a broader view and a longer timescales, whatever, and they become massively in demand by other organisations, and it's something that we've had to accept. That's always been the case. We've had this lift probably in the last couple of years, where we've gone from like a 10% turnover to was 15, 17, and you're saying it's around 19 at the moment, Stu. There's a lot of that in that. Probably people who have been here between 2 and 5 or 6 years, if we can get them to stay that long, we tend to hold them a lot longer, because I do think the culture and the values of the organisation are something that people realise is important to them. And we often have staff, I'll just say anecdotally, not the whole 19%, but I hear from staff saying, they thought they went to greener pastures, and that wasn't the case until they'd actually left this organisation. In terms of the be my best, I suppose I focus more on the number who disagree with that, as opposed to necessarily the number that agree. And unfortunately, that stays a much smaller component of the organisation. And
Yeah, but the ambivalent bit is also
yeah,
something to be.
they're the ones who we can swing, could swing either way. And I guess in many ways, that's where we try and target. I find it hugely disappointing that more people don't think we encourage them to be their best. I think you've picked out the one about WRC, when they actually drill down into their team, does their team leader or their manager encourage them to be their best? It's a lot higher. But the further you get away from your team and the organisation, we tend to find there's less people up there. But I take your point, and I think it's a great challenge to me through this committee, continue to demonstrate what we're trying to do. I think, Stu, you've said you've got some insights coming from outside, what you think we can do, and that is something that we'll report back on.
Was there something else you wanted to finish?
Yeah, look,
And
just to follow on from that, and I don't know whether it's still the case, but Fonterra had a policy of bottom 10% out every year. That's what they do. And then they bring the people in. Professional service firms do the same. At year 5, you'll have 5% max of your graduate intake 5 years ago. And you bring 100 people into the organisation. If they're lucky, you'll have 5 of those still there, but they'll be the top performers. And that's why they're still there. Just on point 19, I'll go back to Kenny, I shouldn't be doing this, but when you're employing people in that area, does Kenny have any input into the interview process, or is he do you just deliver him something and say, welcome, this is Kenny, he's going to look after you, or does he get an input before they're actually taken on as an employee?
He certainly will, Chris, yeah.
Yeah, okay, that's good, and I really encourage you in your employment policies. You mentioned the fact that you want to think like a small business. You have to. You don't have the joy of being a big organisation now and everybody wants to join you. It doesn't happen. So think like a small businessman, be agile and act quickly. So
I note your hand up there, Paul, but Robbie, did you
You
want
can
to
go first.
Paul, go ahead.
Thanks. Look, I think it's comforting to know that we've got lots of policies, but I, like you, Pamela, when I looked at these numbers, looked at some of them, said we've been working on these things since 2018. We might have expected more progress. I'm comforted to hear Stu say that the direction's right, but there's some opportunity for improvement. And I think what that probably means is we've been working on the right issues. There might just be some better approaches. And he gave examples of it, expediting the recruitment process, that sort of thing. I know we've got a culture survey May 23. It'd be interesting to see what the results of that tell us. I'm sort of encouraged to know that Stuart's driving hard. I would imagine the committee's encouragement to him is don't consider there are too many sacred cows, get the job done, using some of that private sector experience that you've got and that you bring.
Thank you. Thank you for your report, Stu. I just, as a catchment person, I'm going to put my catchment hat on here. The catchment's actually been asking for this for a very long time. They've been actually asking for more scholarship, more investment in apprenticeships and all these things. They've been asking it for 20 years since the Waikato region took over these schemes, because there was a huge investment. And if you go back to the deed, it actually says it in the deed. It was a very big, important part was there was to be educated through that they knew the knowledge of the scheme through the development. So I take off my hat that you've recognised that, and it needs to be enhanced and looked after. And the targeted ratepayer is actually willing to pay for that. They've always said that they want to see more of that, but they want to see that they get it at the other end as well. So I think that's really important, and well done, because we've been asking for this for 20 damn years. Like it's been going on and on. Stu started to push it really hard in the last term, that he wanted a scholarship and an apprenticeship system put in, that we have longevity and we have kids buying, or young people buying into their job promotional, where they're directional. And I said, I'd like to do it in a build team if that's ever possible, to get the schemes in a build team, and someone like Kenny managing something like that, that will have much more resilience in the business, because the build team, when it gets tough, they won't be building and they'll understand our health and safety policies, and they can go into strategic parts of the business that they understand, and they can hold hands with someone else. That's their job, and bring someone else in. So health and safety stuff works. So take my hat off to you there as well. So yeah, with my scheme hat, and I've spoken to Kenny about some of the stuff that's happened in thing and Hawke's Bay and that, and some of that staff the manager had only been there for 2 years, and every other person that was working underneath him had worked there for less than 2 years. So they did not understand infrastructure, they did not understand assets, they did not even understand when they altered infrastructure what it was going to be determined the danger they were putting communities in by altering infrastructure, because they had no knowledge base of it. So I take my hat off to you. You've definitely pointed out some things that are really strategic and they need to work on better, because otherwise we will have a failure the same as the Hawke's Bay if we don't recognise these things. And there's more than Kenny in the business, but there's Kenny and Brendan and Sarah and all those people. We have to hold on to them for as long as possible to protect the systems and our management. And yeah, you know where I'm going.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rob.
Maybe if you'd like to just make another comment too, and again, I don't just want to, this is broader than catchment, but it's very relevant to catchment. When it came to the remuneration round last year, it was very tricky because we had council was generous in what they gave us as a budget, but we're still very restrained and much increasing. And the ones we made a focus on last year was those who were paid less, if you like, because they're the ones who are, a classic example, a drainage person or a weed spraying person, they could go and earn another $40,000, $50,000 driving a forklift at a Fonterra dairy factory. That's an example, but we've got that right across the board. Remuneration within this is a challenge. We can bring the people in, but we've got to hold them. And as I said, if we can hold them for 5 or 6 years, they tend to they want to stay part of the fabric here. And just get them past those opportunities that others trying to entice them
I
with.
brought this up 3 months ago, but it doesn't just have to be about money. It can be about sharing the values of this business and what other things it could share with staff to make it that it's not just money, it's fuel or power or whatever, things that they could buy cheaper to keep their life costs better.
Other benefits.
Other benefits. And you can share those with them. And it's up to you guys to make that decision.
And I suppose that does raise a point, as I hear what you're saying about the remuneration. Are we looking at other ways that we can reward stars, right? We understand remuneration is one thing, but I'm looking for some assurance, and I'm sure you will come back to us if there's additional information you want to share, but different ways, different strategies we're employing to ensure that there's a way for us to recognize the stars.
For me, it starts with, do we know who they are?
Yeah, identifying them.
So that's the key thing. And then beyond that, we need to have a package in place. And because people are all individual, they'll have individual needs depending on their role. So it might be that they need to go on a development course, or it might be that they need to get a secondment to a promotion in another part of the business to get exposure to that, or it might need to be that they're on a specialist pay scale as they work through and achieve more. They sit outside of the normal REM framework. So there are a whole lot of different things that we can do, but I think we first need to know who they are and what the roles are that they hold, and then make sure that have a time-bound process around that we're constantly checking in with them and seeing if they are developing, progressing and being promoted. Because the awareness there that the top talent are the ones that can get the job tomorrow is the reality. They're your biggest group of people that can pick up an advert and get a job anywhere. So we really need to hang on to them and do all we can by them.
Right.
Just really quickly, thanks, Madam Chair. Yes, Stuart, just going back to your comment you had around point 42 and code of conduct. And my assumption is that it's around our residents and ratepayers and stuff like that, that those, you mentioned you had still have some concerns and issues around that. I haven't seen anything come up in your reports on specific, events that have happened. So can you just drill down into that?
Yeah, I guess it's obviously it's a confidential process, but just as things come up, we've had a bit of a focus on, you'll have seen from you probably will see coming up from the health and safety report that we've had some vehicle incidents, I guess, as an example. And, you know, if someone breaches a health and safety thing there, we're going to report on it. And obviously there's a process that we can use, which is the code of conduct, to go through and address that. So if somebody drives out of here in a branded vehicle on their mobile phone, we should use the code of conduct to address that. That's kind of, and it's, again, it's like everything else, it's consistency across the whole organization, making sure that we don't just use it in RUD or in ICM, it's across the organization that we kind of apply that. And that really falls to my team to ensure that they're out there actually partnering in the organization, supporting the managers to use that kind of thing. Again, it's only a very small percentage of the business. You're talking the bottom 5% that ever even get looking at it. But I think it's just important that we kind of have that hygiene factor met. So yeah.
Thank you.
Nice. I do want to move on, but my last comment, because we are asking for you to report with some data about how we're going. I do note the continuous learning opportunities alongside the cultural support and induction, and just keen to ensure we see as a committee what is the uptake of these opportunities, what is the outcome of the uptake of those opportunities, how many people are going through, and are we seeing a change as a result of that? So so certainly would like to see that kind of reporting in the future. Are we all good with those two papers? All right. So we'll
Just the on the communications, you got 7 different forms. I know you're trying to amalgamate them, but actually there's
Not necessarily, Robbie. There may be.
What I was going to say is there's actually resilience in having them apart.
That's exactly right. And that's what we found when the cell phone network went down, you know, that people could use their RT.
Yeah.
So it's not at all about that, but it's just having a good understanding, a breadth of knowledge across that. So
Yeah, that's all I wanted to agree.
yeah.
Resilience of having separate.
Yeah.
Thank you.
all right. So we're going to combine these two into one motion. So this is that the report key, I can't read that far away, that the report key role continuity plan, chief executive CERC be received, and that the report good employer obligations and people strategy be received. Do I have a mover and Chris, and a seconder and Bruce? All those in favor?
All right.
Opposed? Carried. Great. I think you've gotten a clear message from us.
Thank you very
What we're
much.
wanting to see in the
Your time.
future.
Yeah, thank you.
Awesome. Thank
too.
you.
See you later on. Have a good day.
All right, so now we'll move on to item 7 is the CE annual performance or remuneration review process for the financial year 23. This is on page 20. Paul, do you want to, Chris, did you want to say, no, Paul, okay. Paul, do you want to introduce this item? You're really just mapping out the time frame, aren't you, for us?
Correct, and this year in particular, accommodating the fact that council takes a break, and that Chris is overseas, which both of which are causing us to delay parts of this process. So this is how we plan to complete it. The detail of the ingredients and the process I shared with all councillors, and then we went through with this committee last time we met. So there shouldn't be any surprises there. But the sort of things that we've got to be turning our mind to right now in terms of the process are we need to start discussion with Chris about KPIs for the year ahead. And I know he's got some thoughts on that. He's presenting his Q3 KPI update today. We've got to start to turn our mind to the internal and external stakeholders we're going to interview. And I think that's probably a discussion best had in public excluded. But this committee needs to identify those people that I'm going to speak to get external feedback and exec team feedback on Chris as part of that review. And then really it's just for information how we're going to go about the rest of the review, allowing that we'll be getting together again at the end of May to look at Chris's assessment for the year, and projection of where he's going to land on all his KPIs, and then I'll get underway in June with the interviews. So all of that's ready by the time we pick up and complete this committee picks up and completes the review right at the beginning of August. So it's just, those are the key elements in the process, Pamela.
Anybody have any questions? Any clarification they'd like? Any comments you'd like to make with regard to the process, or?
No, it is just what Paul has just said. It is a slightly unusual process this year, partly caused by my going away and June and council in July. Would be normal for this committee to probably wrap up my review pretty close to the year end, Paul.
Yep.
So it is slightly different this year. I'm probably just a question for you, Paul. You've suggested that today CERC might want to consider external and internal stakeholders. When were you thinking that might occur?
When we get the public excluded. And that thought arose out of a conversation that I had preparing for today with Pamela, where we recognised that actually the discussion of who we'd talk to and why we might talk to them, we should protect the privacy of those people involved.
Okay, so there'll be a place for it later in the agenda.
Dave is making one right now.
Yes.
Because he's nothing if not flexible, Dave.
Yes.
We'll cover it under the third quarter KPI at the end, because it's a reporting back of that topic for the end of the year, really.
Okay.
And Chris, it won't be the last word on the subject because we won't start them until June, but I just thought it's a useful piece to commence.
It was just an administrative matter to make sure we
Yeah, yeah.
right for the agenda today.
All right. So noting that we'll have that discussion alongside item 9.1. If there's no other questions around the review process, can I get a Councillor Marr, and I'll second that, and all those in favor? Opposed? Carried. All right, we'll now go to the resolution to exclude the public for those items 9.1, 2, 3, and 4, as noted on the screen. I'm happy to move that. Seconder and Bruce. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Right.
Can we pause for a moment?
I shall pause.
You read my mind.
I shall pause.
So while we're just paused to go to public excluded, I have asked that